Okay, now we're doing it.
Absence of evidence is evidence of absence. From Robin Dawes' Rational Choice in an Uncertain World. 1. In fact, this post hoc fitting of evidence to hypothesis was involved in a most grievous chapter in United States history, the internment of Japanese Americans at the beginning of the Second World War, when California Governor Earl Warren testified before a congressional hearing in San Francisco on February 21, 1942. A questioner pointed out that there had been no sabotage or any other type of espionage by the Japanese Americans up to that time. Warren responded, I take the view that this lack of subversive activity is the most ominous sign in our whole situation. It convinces me more than perhaps any other factor that the sabotage we are to get, the fifth column activities are to get, of time just like Pearl Harbor, was timed. I believe we are just being lulled into a false sense of security. Consider Warren's argument from a Bayesian perspective. When we see evidence, hypotheses that assign a higher likelihood to that evidence gain probability at the expense of hypotheses that assign a lower likelihood to the evidence. This is a phenomenon of relative likelihoods and relative probabilities. You can assign a high likelihood to the evidence and still lose probability as to some other hypothesis, if that other hypothesis assigns a likelihood that is even higher. Warren seems to be arguing that, given that we see no sabotage, this confirms that a fifth column exists. You could argue that a fifth column might delay its sabotage, but the likelihood is still higher that the absence of a fifth column would perform an absence of sabotage. Let E stand for the observation of sabotage, and E for the observation of no sabotage. The symbol H1 stands for the hypothesis of a Japanese-American fifth column, and H2 for the hypothesis that no fifth column exists. The conditional probability PE, or E given H, is how confident we'd expect to see the evidence if we assumed the hypothesis as were true. Whatever the likelihood that a fifth column would do no sabotage, the probability if one it won't be as large as the likelihood that there's no sabotage given that there's no fifth column, the probability if two. So observing a lack of sabotage increases the probability that no fifth column exists. The lack of sabotage doesn't prove that no fifth column exists. The absence of proof is not proof of absence. In logic, A equals B, read implies B, is not equivalent to A equals B, read not implies not B. But in probability theory, absence of evidence is always evidence of absence. If E is a binary event and seeing E increases the probability of a failure to observe E decreases the probability of. The probability peaked is a weighted mix of peaked E and peaked E, and necessarily lies between the two. If any of this sounds at all confusing, see an intuitive explanation of Bayes' theorem. It was inevitable that someone would perform experiments which yielded disconfirming evidence, even when those experiments had not been deliberately contrived to test for fifth columnists. There are very simple things a terrorist organization can do which will be credited to someone else. This happened in Japan several times in WW2. If only you count the sabotage as terrorist sabotage or Japanese-American sabotage, depending on where your bias lies. On one occasion, Japanese saboteurs landed on a beach, only to be shot before they could do much damage. This might well have happened even without fifth column involvement. In 1946, two psychiatrists testified before a House Appropriations Committee, testifying to the problem of drifters wandering in from Hawaii without documentation. They claimed that about 95% of the criminal records collected by police agencies came from such drifters who were serving out sentences from prisons. We might therefore hypothesize the Japanese saboteurs using forged identity cards arrived by a Pacific coast where they could be stopped and rounded up. The British used forgeries when the war with Japan turned from negotiation into occupation, and occupation troops had to stop Japanese soldiers who refused to give up arms and supplies. Thus, one is warned of a different source of non-fatal fifth column activity. But just as your letter didn't include the word ravish, it isn't helpful to put someone under oath on some island or under armed guard before talking about fifth column. It makes one too reactive and assumes you know who your enemy is from one situation with a similar story from someone else. Remember all that went into finding Hiroshima, and some kind of stimulus response machine must learn as fast as possible what gets sent. Only if they take precautions doesn't the prisoner quickly repeat an early wrong set of words when he feels uncertain, saving them from talking and putting the experiment off of its next big one, whatever you meant by this sentence. And if all we allow them is simple phrase structure in response, say one word only, with an escape code, then they just obey yes, sir, no, sir, even if they are choking on fear from earlier stress, as you might react to your own helplessness when in trouble. Fear has no reaction available except an automatic fear. Now I just keep still, but machines that react to threat appear in game theory. Who was in charge of giving commands for interrogation experiments on children? And now suppose for just a second they want you to survive as they slowly reduce all that confiscation. Now suppose there are another 1,000 casualties which match up in 1 year, probably on purpose, child labor, without ever suspecting they did a war. Still, that makes me nervous that a mass murderer would say, "Please, sir, may I go to the toilet?" Or whatever it is. People are too busy shouting because we give it lots of warning that they ignore those people that show some presence. Calling a chair to notice him until he accidentally falls out of it as you wave your hands about to grab their attention and get them to calm. Seems strange why there are no traumatic flashbacks from these conversations. Or did he put on his how harmless act then? The regular innocent type talks at great length. Tell him. You say, if you feel weak, let's take a break. An eternity has passed. They don't bother saying anything as their speech falls out and fits. There's just no reaction, right? Well, I feel. RG, why did I run that? I wonder if there's something wrong with me. Dejection. Left blank. All right, I'm good. Whoops, big blush. Why did you press on me with this again? It just goes on in these fragments. He sees himself at a public urinal at midnight with his shut half on. His head falls against the wall, and his out of control drool drips off his lips like a faucet. Then it finally shuts off after he's grabbed his crotch and giggling for no reason, only to run upstairs because he's nearly got himself killed, all without paying attention to his bodyguards. Finally they move there, adorably fat, kid around that fat behind. But 90% of it doesn't really hit communication. Even a whole orchestra going full blast if he could carry the sound with that bright music. Until they learn they want to go to a restaurant. It's good that some guards know who it is they have under them. At times they control prisoners and need not listen to random personalities detected by memory scan, sounding just like people who work around you to watch how they make it safe and avoid catastrophe on an exam. Without spoiling anything of value when they call that fable. Oh yes, when is the perfect moment to remove LSD from this area? And not from someone you called in confidence, a machine-trained tattletale in front of an armed guard in the next room and as high as you were last night. Or ask permission after an already traumatic situation, looking forward to whatever this will bring out on its own. or by an even bigger worry about their subconscious if the first or second group gets it incapable of saying you want some hot sauce. Think. That might give you an excuse for leaving before someone else dies if it should happen in your absence. This isn't anything official. Just one who hears of more cases when their officer mentions an ongoing investigation, even if it doesn't look like much. When it can get overblown this way sometimes. No. If only your client's superhuman entities were kinder with their subordinates crawling out from the animals of mankind in such situations, have they seen a friendly stranger here ever? Just now.
It's a lot. Going to do the next one. Conservation of expected evidence. Hold on. Conservation of expected evidence.